Okay, so right now we're going to look at the Western interaction between China, and we'll save Japan for later. But as we've been looking at how the Westerners are interacting, and by Westerners I mostly mean Europeans, are interacting with different parts of the world. Hopefully you can start to see kind of the similarities and the differences. So let's start with a map, of course, to set perspective. And this is the Qing dynasty at this point in history. And the Qing rule the largest territory, probably, I think they control the largest amount of territory than any other Chinese dynasty. And if you can see the red dash here, this is the boundaries of China today. So they even went beyond that. When the Europeans first came to China in the 1600s, or even before that, remember the Chinese government was definitely the power here. And so they could limit the foreigners to just this one area. And they lived in these little enclaves. And so the Chinese government was in control. Europeans could not go out and wander around in China, and they had to stay in this port city. And so now that Great Britain and other countries are back, this time they have industrial might behind them. And so we're going to start to see the British first and then other Europeans sort of chip away at the Qing dynasty. So how do they do that? Well, they're crafty, and they introduce or start to smuggle in opium. So remember, the Europeans are desperate for Chinese goods, but the Chinese government's like, yeah, no thanks, we don't really need your stuff. So the British introduce or start to smuggle in opium. They are, remember, at this point controlling much of India, where these poppy plants are grown, where opium comes from. And at this point in history, they know that it's addictive, and they know this is a way to then make the balance of trade in their favor. So they smuggle in the opium, create more addicts, so the Chinese individuals are selling and smuggling out the goods that the British want. As you can imagine, as this increases, the Chinese or the Qing dynasty gets upset. So they confiscate hundreds of chests of opium and write a letter. It's not known whether it makes it to Queen Victoria, but one of the foreign ministers of China send a letter saying, how can you do this? You don't like it in your country, then how could you do it to us? So as you can imagine, burning all that money, according to the British, leads to the first of a series of opium wars. And you can see in this picture here the European ships with their, the steamships with their cannons, and the Chinese ships are just no match for the British. So after the first Opium War, they signed the Treaty of Nanjing, and this will be the first of many unequal treaties. Obviously, the favor then is for the British. And so the first Opium War, they win big, the British. They not only gain the island of Hong Kong, but they also then expand port cities. They now get 5 port cities. So the Qing dynasty can't quite control them as much as they could. And this is also another big hit, that the British make sure the Qing agree to extraterritorial rights, meaning the foreign citizens living in China in their enclaves are not subject to Chinese law. So I'm going to let you take in the pictures here, because I know what you're thinking. What's going on here? But we're going to start to see a pattern here, right? When the Chinese see that their government cannot control the foreigners, we'll see a series of rebellions. And so the reaction to the Opium Wars is something called the Taiping Rebellion. Taiping, or the Heavenly Kingdom of Great Peace. So I'm going to jump over here. This is Hong Zhuquan. He's the leader of the Taiping Rebellion, and he believes that he is the brother or the son of Jesus. So Christianity has come into China. in a limited amount, but his incorrect understanding of Christianity kind of shows that they hadn't really quite translated everything correctly. So up until World War I, this rebellion was one of the bloodiest in human history. And so you can see how long it lasted. Oops. And he establishes kind of this Taiping, this kingdom, kind of in south easternish China. And this is what the kingdom looks like to him. He redistributes the land to peasants. Women are created equal. He stops the practice of foot binding, which you recall, right, from last year perhaps. People were giving up their private possessions. Everything was equal. Perhaps this reminds us of something else we have read, say, maybe a little bit like Karl Marx or something. So they have this rebellion. The Qing, right, cannot stop it. It goes on for a long time, completely disrupts the power of the Qing. And so we see then a pattern emerge. How are the Qing able to defeat the rebels? Is they have to rely on Westerners to come in and put down the rebellion. So as you can imagine, a Chinese official talked about these countries, right, including Japan, look at China with a tiger-like veracity, right? They're like, aha, if the Qing dynasty cannot control it, then maybe they can divide up China. So this is a famous political cartoon, right? Here's China, and the Chinese are like, stop everything. So you can see, I'm going to test yourself if you can recognize these powers of Europe. And then, of course, this is Japan. But remember France, Russia, Germany, and, of course, Great Britain. So, so we start to see some instability, right, when the Qing cannot suppress the Taiping Rebellion. So there's problems in court, right? We see eventually the rise of the Empress Dowager Cixi, I should say. So she's not really, she's in charge, but theoretically there's different emperors. This is her, I think, nephew. He's young. He wants to enact a lot of reforms, but Cixi will essentially take them back. You know, let's reform a little bit, but not too much. So there's definitely problems within the Qing court and battles as people try to determine what's best for China. So like the Chinese official mentioned earlier, that there was this tiger-like veracity, and so there was a fear, especially by the Americans, that if the Qing collapse, then all hell will break loose, right? All the Europeans will just jump in and carve up China. So the British and the America think, what if we kind of organize the hysteria? And that's the open door policy proposed by the Secretary of State, John Hay. And it's similar to the Berlin Conference, right, where they would organize that everyone could get a piece of China. And so it doesn't really do much, but it definitely calms the hysteria, right? So then everyone feels like they are having some trade agreements with China. So as you can imagine, right, it doesn't do much for the Chinese. But we introduce this important phase of the sphere of influence, right? So different parts of China are under spheres of influence of different European powers, meaning that imperial power has signs their separate trading agreements with different regions of China. So how did the Chinese react? Of course, another rebellion. This time it is the Boxer Rebellion. That's what the English call it, but the Chinese call themselves the Society of Righteous and Harmonious Fists. So they were practicing martial arts, right? But what the Europeans saw were, you know, boxing. And I pretend this sign says death to foreign devils, which supposedly is the translation. So this rebellion is against the foreigners, right? And the Qing don't encourage it, but they're not like discouraging it. So the Boxers would attack foreign enclaves and foreigners within China. So how was this conflict resolved? Yep, you know the pattern, right? An allied army of Westerners helped put down the Boxer Rebellion. So by this point, right, we're approaching here the 20th century, the Qing are in serious trouble, right? The people have clearly seen again and again how the Chinese or the Qing cannot keep out the foreigners. So I think this is kind of a really interesting photograph. So this is the Forbidden City, and these are Western armies marching into the Forbidden City. And when I was there in 2009, our tour guide showed us kind of these big urns that had gold plating on it, and you could see where the bayonets of the rifles scraped off some of the gold plating. So you can see, so when the Chinese see this, right, it's no surprise that within a decade, the Qing dynasty and thousands of years of imperial rule will be done in China. Okay, so what happens to China similar and or different with India and Africa, right? So the Chinese retain leadership, but you can see they're definitely shaken by the Western influence. All right, next stop, Japan.